The dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, each a tiny world adrift in the stale air of the antique shop. Elara ran a finger over a tarnished silver locket, the metal cold against her skin. She'd always been drawn to forgotten things, to the stories they held in their scratches and dents. It was a kinship, she supposed. She, too, felt a little forgotten. Her life was a quiet collection of routines, the library where she worked, her small apartment, the solitary walks through a city that never seemed to notice her. Then she saw it. Tucked away on a cluttered shelf behind a stack of yellowed postcards, it was a small, unassuming thing. A music box, carved from a dark, almost black wood that seemed to drink the light. Intricate silver filigree, like winter frost on a window pane, traced patterns of vines and stars across its surface. There was no key. No obvious way to open it. Yet, her hand reached for it as if pulled by an invisible string. The shop owner, a man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, had named a price so low it felt like he was paying her to take it. Been here forever, he'd mumbled. Never could get it to play. Now, it sat on her nightstand, a block of silent shadow in her quiet apartment. The room was sparse, furnished with second-hand pieces that spoke of transience, of a life ready to be packed up at a moment's notice. She traced the silver stars, a strange sense of belonging stirring in her chest, a feeling so foreign it was almost painful. It felt like a memory she couldn't quite grasp, a phantom limb of the heart. Exhaustion from the day pressed down on her, a familiar weight. She changed into an old t-shirt, the fabric soft with wear, and slipped under the covers. The city hummed outside her window, a constant, lonely lullaby. Sleep was just beginning to claim her when the first note chimed. It was crystalline, impossibly clear, like a single drop of water falling into a silent pool. Her eyes snapped open. The sound came from the music box. Another note followed, then another, weaving together into a melody that was both haunting and deeply, achingly familiar. It wasn't a tinkling, cheerful tune. This was a lament, a song of starlight and longing, of something lost and yearned for. It filled the small room, wrapping around her, seeping into the hollow spaces inside her. And beneath the music, almost too faint to be real, was a whisper. A voice, ethereal and sweet, woven into the very fabric of the melody. It wasn't a recording, it felt alive, present. It sang a single word, a name that shimmered in the air like heat haze. Lyra. Elara sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The name meant nothing to her. She was Elara. Just Elara. An orphan, a ward of the state, a name plucked from a list by a caseworker. There was no Lyra in her history. Yet the melody continued, and the voice whispered it again, a little stronger this time, a gentle summons. Lyra. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A calling. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air washed over her, and she stared at the dark, silent box, suddenly feeling that she had brought not a treasure into her home, but a ghost. The second night, it happened again. Exactly at midnight, as the digital clock on her nightstand flipped its numbers, the first note echoed in the silence. Elara had been waiting for it, coiled with a tension that had hummed under her skin all day. She tried to pry the box open, had searched for a hidden switch or a winding key, but the wood was seamless, the lid fused shut. It was an impossible object. Tonight, the melody felt different. More insistent. The ethereal voice was clearer, the name resonating not just in her ears, but in her bones. Lyra. It was a caress and a command all at once. She closed her eyes, and this time, images bloomed behind her lids, unsolicited and vivid. A forest of silver-barked trees under a canopy of unfamiliar constellations. The scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. And a face, a man's face, sculpted and severe, with eyes the color of molten silver. He was looking for someone. He was looking for her. She woke with a gasp, the dream clinging to her like spider webs. The music had stopped. The name still echoed in the hollows of her mind. For the first time in years, the quiet loneliness of her apartment felt unsafe. The anonymity she had cultivated, the small, unnoticed life she had built as a shield, suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble about to burst. Who was Lyra? And who was the man with the silver eyes? The feeling of being watched intensified over the next few days. It was a prickle at the back of her neck as she walked home from the library, the sense of a gaze fixed on her from a distant window. She dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of sleepless nights and the haunting music box. But the feeling persisted, a low-grade hum of anxiety that set her teeth on edge. She tried to get rid of the box. She wrapped it in a towel, stuffed it in her tote bag, and walked 10 blocks to a charity donation bin. Her hand hovered over the opening, the weight of the box a solid, cold presence. But she couldn't do it. A profound, inexplicable sorrow welled up inside her, a sense of loss so acute it stole her breath. It felt like abandoning a part of herself. Defeated, she had taken it home, placing it back on the nightstand where it sat like a silent accusation. It knew her, somehow. And that terrified her more than anything. That night, the song was softer, more sorrowful, and the whispered name sounded almost relieved. Lyra. The dreams returned, more detailed this time. The man with silver eyes was closer. He wore dark, tailored clothing that seemed woven from shadow and moonlight. He moved with a predator's grace, his focus absolute. He was hunting. No, not hunting. Searching. And his search was nearing its end. A storm was brewing. The sky had turned a bruised purple-grey by the time Alara left the library, the air thick and heavy with the promise of rain. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the scent of ozone and wet pavement. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle prickle, it was a physical pressure against her back. She quickened her pace, her worn boots slapping against the sidewalk. She risked a glance over her shoulder. 2 figures, cloaked in the deepening twilight, detached themselves from the flow of pedestrians and matched her stride. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. She broke into a run, her bag banging against her hip. She ducked into a narrow alley, a shortcut she'd taken 100 times before. It was a mistake. The alley was a dead end, ending in a high, graffiti-covered brick wall. The smell of damp garbage and decay filled her nostrils. Trapped. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The 2 figures appeared at the mouth of the alley, blocking the only exit. They weren't men. Not entirely. Their forms wavered at the edges, like heat rising from asphalt, their eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent red light. A low, guttural chittering sound escaped one of them, and the air grew cold. Fear, stark and absolute, paralyzed her. This was it. This was the nameless dread that had haunted the edges of her life, finally taking shape. One of them lunged, its fingers elongating into smoky talons. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, a choked sob caught in her throat. A blur of motion. A sound like a blade cutting through silk. A gasp of shocked pain from the creature. Alara opened her eyes. A man stood between her and the attackers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, a silhouette of impossible stillness against the chaos. The streetlight at the alley's entrance cast his face in shadow, but she didn't need to see it. She knew him. The scent of pine and a clear, winter night flooded the alley, overpowering the stench of garbage. The air crackled around him. It was the man from her dreams. He moved again, a fluid dance of deadly grace. There was no struggle. It was an execution. One moment the shadowy creatures were there, poised and menacing, the next, they dissolved into wisps of black smoke with whimpers of evaporating malice. Silence descended, broken only by Alara's ragged breathing and the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. He turned, and the light finally caught his face. It was exactly as she'd dreamt it, sharp, aristocratic planes, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes, God, his eyes. They were a startling, luminous silver, ancient and knowing. They pinned her to the brick wall, stripping away every defense she'd ever built. His gaze was intense, a physical force that held her captive. He took a slow step towards her, his presence consuming the narrow space. The rain began to fall harder, plastering a strand of dark hair to his forehead. He stopped a few feet away, his silver eyes scanning her face, a century of searching contained in a single, burning look. "Lyra," he said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, exactly as she'd imagined. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. A claim. The name, spoken aloud by this impossible man, shattered her paralysis. "No," she breathed, the word thin and reedy. "My name is Alara." A flicker of something, impatience, or maybe pain, crossed his features. "That is the name they gave you to hide you. A shell. Your true name is Lyra." He took another step, and she flinched back, her shoulders hitting the cold, damp brick. Her fear was a living thing, clawing at her throat, but a spark of defiance ignited within it. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I don't know any Lyra." "I am Kale," he stated, as if the name itself should explain everything. "Warden of the Silverwood. And I have been searching for you since the night you were stolen." He gestured vaguely toward the mouth of the alley, where the creatures had vanished. "The Unseelie have found you." The beacon finally grew strong enough for them to sense. Beacon? Alara's mind reeled. Nothing made sense. What beacon? Kale's gaze dropped to the tote bag still slung over her shoulder, the bag where she'd once tried to discard the music box. "The Aelina, the songcaller. The box you carry. It was placed with you as a child, key to your life force, meant to awaken when you came of age. To call you home. To call me." This was insane. A dream. A hallucination brought on by terror. But the solid wall at her back, the cold rain on her skin, the undeniable presence of the man before her, it was all too real. "You're crazy," she whispered, more to convince herself than him. This isn't happening." "It is," he said, his voice softening fractionally, though the intensity in his eyes never wavered. "You are in grave danger. I am here to protect you." "Protect me," she shot back, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You look at me like you own me. I don't need your protection. I just want to be left alone." "You lost the right to be left alone when you were born a princess of the Seelie court," he said, the words sharp and final. He closed the remaining distance between them, and her breath hitched. He didn't touch her, but the heat rolling off his body was a tangible force. He was so close she could see the flecks of darker gray in his silver irises. "They will not stop. They want your light. I will not let them have it." His gaze was a brand, his certainty an iron cage closing around her. She had spent her entire life being small and invisible, and now this man, this warrior from a nightmare, was telling her she was a lost princess. The absurdity of it warred with the terrifying, instinctual feeling that he was telling the truth. Kale followed her back to her apartment building, a silent, imposing shadow who moved with a grace that was utterly inhuman. Every argument she threw at him was met with a quiet, immovable certainty. He didn't belong here, in her world of cracked pavement and sirens in the distance. He was too large, too vital. The very air around him seemed to hum, with a contained power that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "You can't come in," she said, her key fumbling at the lock of her apartment door. Her hands were still shaking. "I am not asking for permission," Kale replied, his voice low and firm. He stood just behind her, and she could feel the heat of him at her back, a daunting wall of muscle and resolve. Where you go, I go. Until the threat is neutralized. The threat? You mean those smoke monsters? The words sounded ridiculous on her tongue. And what about you? You're just as terrifying as they were. He remained silent, but she felt his gaze on her, unwavering. With a sigh of frustrated defeat, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. He followed, and the moment he crossed the threshold, her small apartment seemed to shrink by half. He moved to the window, his back to her, and scanned the street below. The sheer size of him, the coiled energy he radiated, filled the room, suffocating her. This was her sanctuary, her one safe space, and he had invaded it without a second thought. "This is my home," she said, her voice tight. "You have no right." He turned from the window, his silver eyes finding hers in the dim light. "My right is the oath I swore to your mother, Queen Asteria, the day you were born. My right is the century I have spent hunting the whispers of your existence across this realm, and a dozen others. My right is the bond that sings between us, whether you feel it yet or not." The mention of a mother, a queen, sent a painful jolt through her. She had no mother, no family. Only faded memories of indifferent foster parents, and the sterile walls of group homes. "I don't have a mother," she said, the words coming out colder than she intended. "I don't have a bond with anyone. Especially not you." "You do," he insisted, taking a step toward her. "It's why the Aelin called to you in that shop. It's why you couldn't discard it. It's a part of you. A part of us." "Stop it," she snapped, wrapping her arms around herself. "Just stop talking about destiny, and bonds and princesses. My life is small and it's quiet and it's mine. I chose it." "You chose a cage," he countered, his voice sharp with an emotion she couldn't name. "Frustration? Grief? You hid yourself from the world because deep down, you knew something was hunting you. You felt the echo of the danger you were born into." His words hit too close to home, striking a nerve she didn't even know was exposed. He was right. She had always felt like prey. She had mistaken it for anxiety, for the lingering trauma of a lonely childhood. But it had always been there, a shadow at the edge of her vision. The realization didn't make her feel grateful, it made her feel violated. He saw too much. He knew too much. He was dismantling her life, piece by piece, with every word he spoke. And as he stood there, a warrior king in her tiny, fragile world, she had never felt more powerless. The standoff lasted for hours. Cale remained by the window, a sentinel carved from granite and moonlight, while Alara huddled on her worn sofa, a chasm of silence and tension between them. He didn't eat, didn't sit, didn't seem to require any of the human comforts her apartment offered. He simply watched, his focus absolute. The quiet was more unnerving than the shouting had been. It allowed her thoughts to race, to circle back to his impossible claims. A lost princess. The Seelie court. An oath. As the clock on her oven ticked closer to midnight, a new kind of dread began to build in her. The music box. Right on cue, the first crystalline note chimed from the bedroom. Cale's head snapped toward the sound. A profound change came over him. The hard lines of his face softened, the warrior's vigilance replaced by an expression of raw, unguarded sorrow. He closed his eyes, his posture slumping almost imperceptibly. Alara watched him, stunned by the sudden show of vulnerability. The melody drifted from the other room, the familiar, haunting lament. She had always found it sad, but hearing it now, seeing its effect on him, she understood it was a vessel of pure grief. He walked slowly toward her bedroom, drawn by the sound. She followed, hesitating in the doorway. He stood before the nightstand, gazing down at the music box as its song filled the room. The ethereal voice whispered its nightly summons. "Lyra." "It is the song of returning," Cale said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the box. Your mother composed it. She poured her hope and her despair into its creation, a final desperate act before the unsealer breached the castle walls. He finally turned to face her, and the raw pain in his silver eyes made her breath catch. The coup was led by my brother, Malachi. He was consumed by jealousy, convinced the throne should have been his. He made a pact with the Unsealer court for the power to take it. When your parents fell, your mother's last act was to give you to a trusted guard, along with the Aelina, and send you through a hidden gate into this world. To hide you until I could find you. He looked down at his hands, his fists clenching and unclenching. I was warden of the Northern March, fighting a diversionary skirmish Malachi had orchestrated. By the time I realized the truth and fought my way back to the capital, it was too late. Everyone was gone. The palace was in ruins. And you had vanished. He looked back up at her, and the guilt in his eyes was a chasm. I have searched for 100 years, Elara. A century of false leads and fading hope. That song, it was my only guide. The only proof you still existed. He took a hesitant step closer. I know I am intense, overbearing. But for 100 years, the thought of Malachi's shades finding you before I did has been my living nightmare. I will not fail your mother again. The story settled over her, not as a fairy tale, but as a tragedy. A history she was unwillingly a part of. The music box wasn't a ghost, it was a message in a bottle, sent across an ocean of time. Elara stared at the music box, its dark wood seeming to absorb the low light of her bedside lamp. Kale's story echoed in the room, weaving itself into the mournful melody that still played. Your mother composed it. The words resonated deep inside her, stirring something dormant. A memory. An instinct. Hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers tracing the silver filigree stars. The moment her skin touched the cold metal, the world fractured. It wasn't a thought, it was a full-body immersion. The scent of jasmine and rain. The cool, heavy weight of a silver pendant against her chest. And a voice, not the ethereal whisper from the box, but a warm, rich alto, humming the melody close to her ear. She saw through a child's eyes, looking up at a woman's face. A face so much like her own, but older, framed by hair like spun moonlight, with kind, loving eyes the exact shade of Kale's. The woman smiled, a smile that felt like sunshine. My little star, she murmured, her voice a balm. My Lyra. The vision shattered. Elara gasped, stumbling back, her hand flying to her chest. The memory, it was her memory. Buried, fragmented, but undeniably hers. The name Lyra no longer felt alien. It felt stolen. A part of her she hadn't known was missing. Kale saw the shift in her, the dawning shock and recognition in her eyes. The hard certainty in his posture eased, replaced by a cautious hope. He didn't press, didn't say I told you so, he just waited, giving her the space to process the cataclysm that had just occurred in her mind. I saw her, Elara whispered, her voice trembling. My mother. A wave of relief so profound it was almost tangible washed over Kale's face. Asteria, he breathed, his voice soft with reverence. The music from the box finally faded, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The spell was broken, but the truth remained, settling like dust over every surface of her life. She was Lyra. She was also Elara. She was a library assistant from a world of concrete and electricity, and she was a lost princess from a world of silver forests and star magic. The two halves of her identity warred within her, a dizzying, nauseating conflict. She looked at Kale, really looked at him for the first time without the lens of pure fear. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the century of guilt he carried in the set of his shoulders. He wasn't just a domineering warrior. He was a guardian who believed he had failed. What happens now? She asked, the question small and fragile in the heavy silence. This was the moment. The turning point. The powerful protector could issue his commands, could tell her of her duty, her destiny. Instead, he met her gaze, and for the first time, his silver eyes held not just intensity, but a question. "That," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "is for you to decide. I can take you home, to the Silverwood, where you will be safe among the last loyalists of your mother's court. I can teach you about your heritage, about the light you carry. Or I can stay. And I can guard you here, while you choose the life you want." He paused, his throat working. "My oath was to protect you. Not to command you. I was wrong to forget that." The offer of choice was a more powerful persuasion than any command he could have given. It was the one thing she had craved her entire life. Agency. A say in her own fate. A flicker of trust, tentative and delicate as a moth's wing, took flight in her heart. She wasn't just a lost object he had found. He was finally seeing her. The attack came without warning. One moment, the apartment was silent, steeped in the fragile truce between them. The next, the window overlooking the fire escape exploded inward, showering the room in a cascade of glass and splintered wood. Two unseelie shades poured through the opening, their forms more solid, more menacing than the ones in the alley. Their red eyes burned with a hungry light, fixed on Alara. Cale moved before the first shard of glass hit the floor. He was a whirlwind of dark fury, positioning himself between her and the invaders. A blade appeared in his hand, seemingly coalescing from the shadows themselves. It glowed with a faint, silvery light, humming with contained power. "Get back," he roared, not at her, but at the creatures. But they were not so easily dispatched this time. One lunged at Cale, its smoky talons clashing against his silver blade in a shower of black sparks. The other slithered around the fight, its form elongating, its gaze locked on Alara. It moved with a horrifying, unnatural speed. She scrambled backward, tripping over an overturned chair, her heart seizing with pure terror. Cale saw the flanking maneuver. With a guttural cry, he shoved his opponent back and spun, trying to intercept the second creature. He was a fraction of a second too late. The shade's talons lashed out, and Cale threw himself in their path. The claws ripped through his shoulder, tearing through his dark jacket, and the flesh beneath. He cried out, a sharp, guttural sound of pain, and stumbled to one knee. The scent of his blood, coppery and strangely vital, filled the air. Seeing him fall, seeing him injured for her, broke something open inside Alara. The terror didn't vanish, but it was consumed by a white-hot surge of something else. Rage? A fierce, protective instinct she had never known she possessed. The creature that had wounded him turned its attention back to her, its lipless mouth stretching into a triumphant sneer. It raised its claws for a final strike. Time seemed to slow down. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the rage was a fire in her veins. "No," a voice screamed in her mind. "You will not touch him." She threw her hands up, a purely instinctual gesture of warding. She expected to feel the shredding impact of its claws. Instead, a blinding torrent of pure, white gold light erupted from her palms. It wasn't just bright, it was solid, a physical wave of power that slammed into the unseelie shade. The creature shrieked, a sound of agony and disbelief, as the light enveloped it. It didn't just dissolve into smoke this time, it incinerated, turning to black dust that scattered on the force of the blast. The room fell silent. The other shade, which had been pressing its attack on the kneeling Cale, froze. Its red eyes swiveled from the dust of its companion to Alara, who stood with her hands still outstretched, trembling, the residual light dancing around her fingertips like captive stars. A new emotion flickered in its gaze, fear. With a chittering hiss, it dissolved into smoke and fled back out the broken window into the night. The adrenaline drained out of her as quickly as it had come, leaving her weak and shaking. The light faded from her hands. She stared at them, then at the empty space where the creature had been. Kale pushed himself to his feet, hissing in pain as he clutched his wounded shoulder. He looked from the dissipating dust to her, his silver eyes wide with an astonishment that mirrored her own. The immediate danger was gone, but the aftermath was a chaotic tableau of shattered glass and Kale's pain. He leaned heavily against the wall, his face pale in the dim light. Dark blood seeped through his fingers, staining his jacket and the wall behind him. The sight of it sent a fresh spike of panic through Alara. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It is nothing," he gritted out, but the tremor in his body betrayed the lie. "Don't be an idiot," she snapped, the fear sharpening her tone. The timid librarian was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. "Sit down." "On the sofa." "Now?" To her surprise, he didn't argue. He staggered to the couch and sank into it, his head falling back against the cushions with a weary groan. The roles were utterly reversed. The all-powerful protector was wounded and vulnerable in her living room, and she, the fragile human, was the one left standing. She ran to the bathroom, her mind racing. First aid. She grabbed the small kit from under her sink, antibiotic ointment, gauze, tape. It felt ridiculously inadequate for a wound inflicted by a smoke monster, but it was all she had. When she returned, he had managed to shrug out of his ruined jacket. The shirt beneath was soaked with blood. "Let me see," she said, her voice softer now. She knelt in front of him, the shattered glass crunching under her knees. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before dropping his hand. The wound was deep, 4 vicious gashes that tore through muscle. The flesh around them was dark, tinged with black, as if poisoned. A wave of nausea rolled through her. "It is unsealer magic," he murmured, his breath catching. "It resists normal healing." Ignoring him, she gently began to clean the wound with a cloth dampened with warm water. He flinched, hissing as she dabbed at the torn flesh, but he didn't pull away. The proximity was overwhelming. His scent, pine and winter and now the metallic tang of blood, filled her senses. She could feel the heat of his skin, the powerful muscles of his chest contracting with every pained breath. The intimacy of the act was staggering, a world away from the fear and tension that had defined their interactions until now. As she worked, her fingers brushed against his uninjured skin. A jolt, like static electricity, leaped between them. He sucked in a sharp breath. At the same time, a faint, golden warmth began to emanate from her fingertips, sinking into his skin. The black discoloration around the wound seemed to lighten, receding from her touch. Kale stared at her hand, then at her face, his expression one of utter awe. "Your light, it's a healing grace. The royal bloodline." She didn't know what she was doing, only that it felt right. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, next to the injury, concentrating, willing the warmth to grow. A soft, golden glow bloomed from her hand, bathing his skin in light. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, the tension draining from his body. The pain in his eyes receded, replaced by a raw vulnerability that struck her to the core. When she finally pulled her hand away, the wounds were no longer bleeding. They were still there, angry red lines, but the venomous blackness was gone. They looked clean, already beginning to knit themselves together. Exhausted, she sat back on her heels. He reached out, his uninjured hand cupping her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. His silver eyes, now clear and startlingly close, held hers. "For a century," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "I searched for a princess. A symbol. A duty. I was so focused on finding Lyra, the heir I had lost, that I was blind." His gaze softened, filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "But it was Alara who saved me. It is Alara who sits before me now, with the light of suns in her hands and the courage of a queen in her heart." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. The fear was gone, burned away and replaced by a connection so profound it felt like coming home. "I am sorry," he murmured, his lips hovering just above hers. "For my arrogance. My fear made me a tyrant." "Your fear saved my life," she whispered back. "No," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You saved your own." And then he closed the small distance between them. His kiss was not one of possession or claiming. It was a question, a plea, a surrender. It was soft and hesitant at first, then deepened as she responded, her hands coming up to frame his face. It was a kiss that tasted of ozone, an ancient sorrow, and a dawning, brilliant hope. In that moment, there was no princess, no warden, no fated bond. There was only Cale and Alara, two broken pieces finding their fit in the ruins of her living room. And for the first time, she felt truly, completely whole. The quiet that followed the storm, both literal and metaphorical, was a fragile thing. Cale's wounds were healing at a supernatural rate, a testament to her nascent power and his own fey vitality. They spent the next day in a state of suspended reality, cleaning up the glass, boarding the window, and talking. He told her of the Silverwood, of its shimmering trees and moon-petal flowers. She told him of her quiet life, of the comfort she found in the hushed aisles of the library, of the persistent loneliness that had been her only constant companion. He listened, not as a warden to a princess, but as a man getting to know the woman he was falling in love with. The peace was shattered by a knock on the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was three slow, deliberate thuds that seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. Cale was on his feet instantly, his healed shoulder showing no sign of its former injury. The silver blade was once again in his hand, and the gentle man from moments before was gone, replaced by the lethal warrior. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Alara's heart hammered, but she didn't cower. She stood her ground a few feet behind him, her hands tingling with the memory of her power. She was done hiding. "Cale, my brother," a smooth, cultured voice called from the other side of the door. "Have you forgotten all your manners? It is rude not to welcome family." The voice was laced with mocking amusement, and a chill slithered down Alara's spine. "Malachi. He is alone," Cale murmured to her. "I can't sense his shades." "This is arrogance." He strode to the door and threw it open. The man in the hallway was the antithesis of Cale. Where Cale was shadow and winter night, this man was cold, polished steel. He was handsome, with the same aristocratic bone structure, but his silver eyes were devoid of warmth, like chips of ice. He wore impeccably tailored human clothes, a dark grey suit that made him look more like a CEO than a usurper king. A condescending smile played on his lips. "There you are," Malachi said, his gaze sliding past Cale to land on Alara. It was a physical violation, a look that assessed and dismissed her in the same instant. "And this must be the little lost star. How quaint. I expected more." "You will not speak to her," Cale snarled, raising his blade. Malachi tutted, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, put that away, brother. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to offer a deal," his eyes fixed on Alara again. "Come with me, little Lyra." "Willingly. Your life in the human realm is over. Cale can offer you a life hiding in the woods with a handful of rebels. I can offer you a throne. Your throne. Marry me, unite the courts, and we will end this tiresome war." The audacity of it was breathtaking. "Marry you?" Alara choked out, a bubble of incredulous laughter rising in her throat. "The man who murdered my parents." Malachi's smile didn't falter. "Politics requires pragmatism, not sentiment. Your parents were weak. They clung to tradition while our world withered. I brought strength. Power. Join me, and you will share in that power." He took a step forward, and Cale moved to block him. "Don't be a fool. You have a taste of your magic now. Do you really want to return to a life of stocking books and living in this hovel? His words were designed to wound, to prey on the insecurities of the life she'd known. But they no longer had power over her. She looked at Cale's rigid back, at the fierce, protective line of his jaw, and she knew where her power truly lay. It wasn't on a throne. It was in the choice she was about to make. "My name is Elara," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. She stepped out from behind Cale, meeting Malachi's icy gaze without flinching. "And my answer is no." Malachi's mask of civility finally cracked. A flash of fury lit his eyes. "Then you have chosen death." A pity. He moved, faster than humanly possible, his hand lashing out not at Cale, but at her. But Cale was ready. He met the attack, their blades clashing in a scream of tortured metal. The fight spilled out into the hallway, a deadly ballet of silver flashes and guttural snarls. Malachi was Cale's equal in skill, but his fighting was cruel, filled with cheap shots and taunts. Cale fought with a desperate, focused rage, his every move a shield for the woman behind him. Elara knew she couldn't just stand there. Cale was still recovering. This was her fight, too. She focused, reaching for the fire she'd discovered inside her. It answered her call, a warm, pulsing light gathering in her palms. Malachi, seeing the glow, laughed. "A little parlor trick. You think that can stop me?" He disarmed Cale with a deft twist of his blade, sending the silver sword skittering across the floor. He lunged for his brother's throat. "No!" Elara screamed. She didn't just unleash the light as a blunt force. She remembered the filigree on the music box, the intricate patterns of vines and stars. She shaped the light, weaving it into brilliant, sharp tendrils, lances of pure energy. They shot forward, wrapping around Malachi, binding his arms and legs. He roared, struggling against the incandescent bonds. "What is this?" he spat, the light searing his unsealer-tainted skin. "This is the light of the queen you murdered," Elara said, advancing on him, the glow around her intensifying. "And the strength of the daughter you underestimated." Cale used the opening. He scrambled for his sword and rose, plunging it deep into his brother's chest. Malachi's eyes went wide with shock. The light from Elara's bonds surged, pouring into the wound, consuming him from the inside out. He opened his mouth, but only dust and fading light emerged. His body dissolved, leaving nothing behind but a whisper of cold air and the faint smell of ash. Silence. Cale stood breathing heavily, leaning on his sword. Elara's light faded, leaving her trembling but upright. It was over. He came to her, sheathing his blade. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on tight, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Elara Lyra," he murmured against her skin, the two names finally joined, no longer a conflict but a whole. "My light." They left the city the next day. Her apartment, with its boarded window and haunted hallway, was no longer a home. Home was with Cale. He opened a gateway, a shimmering tear in reality that smelled of pine and starlight, leading to the Silverwood. She took one last look at the human world she had known, then stepped through without hesitation. Her new life was one of learning, of mastering her light, of understanding the politics of a world reborn, of helping Cale rally her mother's people. But it was also a life of love. They chose each other, day after day, not because of prophecy or duty, but because of a bond forged in a dusty antique shop, tempered in battle, and sealed with a choice. Months later, they sat by a luminous stream in the heart of the Silverwood. The music box rested on the moss between them. It had never played again, its purpose was fulfilled. Elara picked it up, tracing the familiar silver stars. She had reclaimed her heritage, but she had done it on her own terms, as Elara. She was not just the heir to a throne, She was a survivor who had found her strength, a lonely soul who had found her partner. Kale took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Are you happy here?" he asked, his silver eyes soft in the twilight. She looked at him, at the unwavering love in his gaze, and then at the vibrant, magical world around her. "I'm not just happy," she said, her voice full of a peace she had never imagined possible. "I'm home."